Hey everyone, hey Greg. Everybody, we'll give you a few minutes to join. We'll get started with everything in about 1 minute. Thank you, Misha, for the introduction. Everybody else that's on already, love to hear from you. Go ahead and jump in the chat and introduce yourself, name and where you're from. Anything in particular that you want to hear about today would be great. Got most of the content already planned, but we can answer questions, and probably we're something we're going to cover anyhow. So, all right. Let's go ahead and get started here. So thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about member churn and predictive analytics. So it's going to be really interesting. So you've heard A2 and our partners talk about predictive analytics before. This one's going to be a little bit more in depth. We're joined by our partners from Fionta, and there's going to be a really in-depth look at some of the theory, right? Some of the concepts behind predictive analytics. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And then of course we'll look at how you can apply those kinds of things using tools, right? So we'll have an intro. We're going to look at data mining and modeling. Katie's going to walk us through predictive analytics step by step. We're going to learn how to apply it. Again, this is taking those concepts and taking action on them, right? Using tools to do predictive and using that to advance your business. We'll wrap it up with some key takeaways, and Q&A is going to be kind of throughout. So definitely jump in. We want this to be a conversation with participants. I'm going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A as Katie's teaching us all. So feel free to ask questions, and we will answer each and every one of them as we go through. Okay, so by way of introductions, first I want to introduce A2, right? So who is Association Analytics? Many of you that are joining have been on our webinars before. I won't belabor this too much, but for those that are joining for the first time, who is A2? We are a company that does analytics for associations, right? As the name would imply. So we're located in Arlington, Virginia. We have a SaaS platform tool called Acumen, which is a tool that aggregates data, from your disparate sources, gets it into a central repository, and then you can do all sorts of things with that data, right? There are pre-built visualizations, charts and graphs and dashboards. But one of the things you can do is you can apply it for predictive analysis. Now, some of those things are included in the product. Other things can be done as services using that integrated data, right? We offer a bunch of services to go along with it. And we've been doing this for 20 years with 100% client retention on our Acumen product. We're really proud of that. So if you want to learn more, please check us out. And yeah, so my name is Bill. I'm the Senior VP of Strategy and Solutions with Association Analytics. Been with the company for a little over 7 years. And I do a lot of work with our clients and prospects, and internally with our development and our implementation teams, trying to keep those things aligned, right? What the market is looking for in our product and our services, and how we can deliver that best to meet those demands. So I'm happy to be here. And again, look forward to answering any questions that you have. And I am joined by Katie Burns. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie to introduce herself.
Thank you, Bill. My name is Katie Burns. I serve as Fionta's CFO and also analytics strategist, and wear a few other hats along the way. I've been with the company for just over 6 years and received my master's in business analytics from Notre Dame in 2020. So very invested and excited about today's topic, and happy to be here with you all. And I am going to tell you all a little bit more about Fionta. So Fionta was founded in 2001 as an IT consulting firm. And while Fionta has grown and evolved our business over time, our mission has always been clear: to provide the technology needs of associations and nonprofits with best-in-class strategies and solutions. And with the rapid development of cloud-based technologies in the early 2000s, Fionta made a move to focus our company's offerings on Salesforce. We did that in about 2006. Today, we are both a .org premium partner and .com Crest partner. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C. over the river with a physical office on 18th Street. And we actually became a remote first company last year. So our employees work from all over the US. And as they say, happy employees make happy customers. So we really enjoy what we do at Fionta, and we are proud to be recognized by the organization Great Place to Work. And lastly, you will see Fionta involved at association events, not just as supporting as a sponsor, but also as a thought leader and educator on topics like data management, analytics, artificial intelligence, change management, and related best practices. So on the topic of analytics, I'm actually going to walk you all through how we can apply analytics to reducing member churn with predictive analytics. All right, give me 1 second. All right, to orient us to the discussion today, so why does this matter? According to the asae Center, roughly 70% of revenue is directly attributable to members for trade associations and a bit lower for professional societies. This includes member dues, conferences, education, webinars, certifications, etc. So the danger in losing a member is all the collateral revenue loss. And as you all well know, it's so much cheaper to keep an existing member happy and renewing than to bring on a brand new one. So how do we use predictive analytics to learn more about our members and anticipate and avoid renewal risks? I suspect some of you may be expecting me to start here with some code and algorithms to solve the problem. But for those of you who might be dreading that, don't worry, I'm not going to be writing any code today. This is a lot more than just inputting data into a black box and reading the output. Today, I'm going to be walking you through both the data mining process and a type of modeling that we can use that's really tool agnostic. And then I'll hand it back to Bill, as he said, and he can walk you through how this process applies to Acumen. So let's take a giant step back and start with defining the business problem. For the leaders in the audience, it is our job to deconstruct these big, hairy problems into segments that can be tackled by sometimes discrete analytical tasks. And this process may be possible with just your leadership team, but I highly recommend that you consult with members of your organization who really understand your data. Better yet, have them at the table. Their perspective is super important because they probably have a good sense of the strengths and weaknesses of the data. And defining the business problem is where a lot of the creativity and team collaboration can play a big role. And there's a few different ways to go about this, but today I would like to leverage a framework. We're going to use data to generate predictions that can help us make better decisions to gain competitive advantage. And applying it to today's question, let's leverage our member data to assess who is at risk of churning in order to increase member retention. So this is what's called a supervised data problem. And I want to tell you all a little bit about the difference between supervised and unsupervised. So we'll start with unsupervised. When you train a descriptive model, that's called unsupervised learning. And descriptive models summarize data in new and interesting ways. All features have an equal weight, and so no feature really is more important than the other. And some examples of this type of model includes clustering. And clustering divides data into groups or clusters that are based upon common factors of similarities. And for your organization, think about the attributes that you have collected about your members, like location, gender, age, job function, perhaps credentials like CPA, JD, MD, industry. So we could do a pretty simplistic segmentation, let's say by age, and bucket all of our members in decades. But what about if we look at all of these factors at the same time? What other natural clusters might emerge? And leveraging cluster analysis could help inform perhaps what events you might recommend, or even create new personas for your marketing campaigns. And another type of unsupervised model is known as association rules, and a common application is called market basket analysis. So this is something that we actually all experience when we shop on Amazon. So say for example, I'm in the market for a new umbrella. When I find the umbrella that I'm interested in, the other items that you might like section advertises for Band-Aids, lip balm, and a Nicolas Cage coffee mug. True story, I actually found this. And I have no idea what those three things have in common, but something in the Amazon machine has highlighted that these purchases can co-occur at a greater frequency than you'd expect by chance. So for your organization, you could use association rules to recommend a series of courses that might not be related to, overtly related, but could perhaps lead to high engagement. Okay, so we'll jump to supervised learning. So by contrast, when a specific target or variable is identified, that's a supervised problem. And predictive models are distinct in that one variable is defined as the dependent variable, and the other data points within the data set, known as the independent variables, are used to predict the dependent variable. So examples of this type of model include regression. And there are a number of different types of regression. One that we're all pretty familiar with is simple linear. So a change in X leads to a corresponding change in Y. And we'll talk in a bit about logistic regression. Another example of supervised is classification trees, which is simply a set of rules or questions that are used to predict a value. And these types of models are known as greedy learners in that they'll just keep gobbling up whatever data you throw at them, the more the better. And one type that you might be familiar with is called a decision tree. And the benefit of leveraging something like a decision tree is that it's a lot easier to read and act on because it leverages plain language from the data set that you're already familiar with. So,
Katie, could I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So just for the benefit of the group, so we're going to be talking about, I think mostly about regression today. Just to, spoiler alert, regression, logistic regression in particular is the type of analysis that Acumen uses. I think it's probably the most common, for a problem like this. Is it true to say that the independent variable, right, in this case is are the things that the predictors, right, the different types of things that you mentioned, and the dependent variable is the member churn itself, the churn or the retention, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, great.
So in our case, our independent variable is member churn, and has two classes. A 1 represents a member that has left or churned, and a 0 represents a member that is still current. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we walk through the data mining process.
Great. And just one more clarification. So sometimes we talk about retention, and then sometimes we talk about churn, right? So those are just like opposite sides of the same coin. And so if Katie and I are using those terms interchangeably, it's just like you can either monitor member churn, which is like how many you lose, or you can monitor member retention, which is how many you keep. And those are basically calculating the same thing, right? Okay, so just like kind of reversing those 1s and 0s that we were just talking about.
Exactly, yeah, just a different way to look at the same problem, really.
Okay.
All right, so let's jump to the data mining process. So there are 6 steps in this process, some of which really deserve more attention than they often get. And let's think about this process within the context of our question again. And for now, which members have the highest likelihood to churn? So starting with phase 1, data collection, data exploration, and data preparation. So we're going to start with data collection. If I can get to my slide, here we go. Okay, so this is something that each of you are doing today through your AMS, your LMS, your website, your member community. You can think of this as your organization's raw material. And often a key investment is acquiring data about your dependent variable. And like we just talked about, we should be set in this case because either a member renewed or they did not. Either a member is current or they are not. So we likely already have the information we need about the dependent variable. But you might ask about some other questions during this stage. What additional data might I need to answer my question? What data is relevant? How many observations or records do I need to be able to rely on my model? What will it cost to combine disparate data sources? And what will it cost to acquire or fill in gaps in my data? And this is, it's really important, we said at the gate, out of the gate here, to understand the strengths and weaknesses of your data, involve your team, And because no data set is perfect, and similarly, no model is perfect. So we're going to have to iterate, and having a good understanding of your data will help you pivot during that process. All right, next up is data exploration. So why is this step important? So this is the next step in understanding your data and contextualizing and filling in gaps. So you can run some basic summary statistics like mean, median, range, and even some basic visualizations, histograms, bar charts, scatter plots across your data set that can help you understand the distribution of your data and also evaluate outliers. And this process can also help you determine the sparsity and density of each feature, or to the degree to which data does or does not exist for each variable. So something to think about as an example, let's say you started tracking community engagement at the beginning of 2019. If you run a prediction model leveraging members who started all the way back, 2017 and on, you'd be missing 2 years of data about how many posts members put up in a given year, how many comments they made, what type or how much content they shared within your community. So you might want to consider, like, what will it cost me to collect and populate that data? Is it worth it to have a little more longevity in your data set? You can think about that during this phase. Next up is data preparation. This stage will involve cleaning your data, like deduplicating member records, standardizing state abbreviations, etc. And through exercising your data analysis muscle, you can unearth obvious discrepancies and prioritize which data is most critical to clean in the first place. This is where you also might combine disparate data sources or correct inconsistencies. And I would also recommend that you think about the balance of your data set and correct for major imbalances. And by this, I mean if you have an unequal distribution towards one class or another. So again, in our case, our dependent variable has 2 classes. Keep in mind, our dependent variable is member churn. 1 represents former, 0 represents current. So when we train our model, the balance should be 50-50 to roughly, you're never going to get it right on, but to maximize accuracy and reduce error and bias. And we can think about what happens if we train a model, say 90% represents active members, 10% represents inactive members. At best, this imbalance might lead to poor performance, but at worst, I really encourage you to actually stop and consider what decisions you might be making from this analysis, because the lack of diversity could have an impact on that. And we've all seen and heard real world examples of this. Today, algorithms can influence where our kids go to school, if we're eligible for a loan. And there's even something in the news this week. Issues have been identified under the First Step Act, which is a 2018 law that was designed to improve criminal justice outcomes, as well as reduce the size of our federal prison population. And the algorithm under this program is called Pattern, and it provides a score that will directly impact how much time someone spends in prison. So the DOJ is in the midst of actually addressing the racial bias that they've discovered in the tool after finding that the algorithm actually suffered from math and human error, and 14,000 people wound up in the wrong risk category. And unfortunately, there were big disparities for people of color. So while a lot of us probably won't be interacting with a model that has had such high stakes, I really think that every data professional today has a responsibility to consider what bias could be perpetuated by the code.
Interesting. Katie, could I, sorry to interrupt, a quick question.
Sure.
So we're looking at the balance here, it's 90-10. And so if I take a random sample of my data and I have 90% retention, right? Yep. Then this is kind of what my data is going to look like. So if I understand you correctly, and just, for the benefit of those listening, what you're really saying is that I need to be more deliberate about how I choose my sample to test and train the model, correct? Right? Because if I just take a random sample, I'm very likely to get something that's basically 90-10, right? 90% that are current and 10% that are not. And that's going to be insufficient to train the model. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and in a case like that, you could actually oversample in the 10% category. So you can set the model so that you are intentionally getting more attributes, or excuse me, more records to represent the 10% to start shifting that balance.
Exactly. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so let's move on to the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. So it's critical that you're thoughtful and thorough about this phase, as the quality of underlying data can have an enormous impact on the accuracy and efficacy of your model. And let's jump to phase 2, which is modeling, evaluation, and iteration. So this is no doubt, modeling is where the data science comes into play. At this stage, you will be training, testing, and tuning your model. This is also where matchmaking comes into play when you're selecting your model. So let's remember the differences between supervised, predictive, what we're talking about today, and unsupervised, descriptive methods. Which path makes the most sense for the question you're trying to answer? It's very important that the right type of model is selected to minimize error in the process. Next up is evaluation. At this stage, you will have results to assess and analyze, and I encourage you to take time to study your results here, slice and dice the data. Are the people you'd expect to see in the renewed category, in the in the renewal category, and same on the other side of the coin, those who you expected to churn, who fell outside of your expectations. Let's say, for example, you have a group of users that has super high engagement scores or kind of known entities in your space. In theory, their probability to churn should be pretty low. Where did they actually land? You could also look at, let's say we have a member who spent a ton of money last year to present at a conference and then didn't renew. Where did they land? And depending on the type of model that you're looking at, you will certainly be looking at accuracy measurements. And one that's mocked up on the screen now is called a confusion matrix. And this structure helps us to assess the accuracy of the model by quantifying the true and false positives and the true and false negatives. So is it more important for you to have high sensitivity, as in more confidence that the true positives were correctly identified? Or let's say those who are truly going to churn, or higher specificity, more confidence that the true negatives were correctly identified. And there are trade-offs here as well. And you just need to think about that when you're balancing and tuning your model. And to explore those trade-offs, let's think about something that we are all pretty familiar with at this point, rapid COVID-19 tests. So a company that's making these tests, Global Diagnostic Systems, they just released their clinical trial data on with their at-home tests, I believe, and they reported 100% sensitivity, 95% specificity. So in the case of COVID-19 testing, we want to be optimizing towards sensitivity to correctly identify positive cases to reduce the spread. And in our case, sensitivity might also be more important because we want to have a higher confidence that we're correctly identifying those who are at risk of churning. All right, so finally, we are at iteration. So I would treat this as a rule, not an exception. If this model didn't answer your question, why not? Sometimes you might have to recast it. And, is this model or process built in a way that you can continuously train the model with new data or tune it based upon changes in your environment? And I think that's something we've all learned in the last couple of years. The only constant is change, and your organization is dynamic. So just think about all you've done to adjust to the pandemic. Maybe you shifted gears to focus on engagement in your online community because we couldn't meet in person. Maybe you developed new products or services to address trends in the labor market, or maybe you just fully replaced in-person events and you're staying with virtual. So this is where the creativity and adaptation will continue. And we want to be sure that we can keep factoring in organizational and economic changes in the model. And in fact, this is one reason why machines and algorithms are far from exceeding the potential of the human mind, because it's not a set it and forget it type of reality. So successful predictive modeling requires your institutional knowledge and insight, and we just need to be ready to think critically and iterate. So we're going to go back to the business problem for a second. We look at the insight. What did we gain? Does our model, again, address our initial question? Does it help us to make better decisions and determine next steps? And I want you all to think about being the bridge between the data and the decision makers. Are the results of the model coherent and actionable to stakeholders beyond those who are just in the weeds? And when you engage in this process, you can tie analytical questions to insights that will change your organization for the better, we hope. And I think we all can play a part in that journey. So you all came for modeling in a demo, and I just spent a ton of time on the data mining process. And the reason I did that is the reality is that roughly 80% of the time in this process is actually spent in phase one: data collection, exploration, and preparation. And the remaining 20% is spent with modeling, evaluation, and iteration. And I point this out because, especially for those leaders in the room, I think it's really important to have patience and make space for the hard and time-intensive work that must happen in phase one. And like a lot of things, tone from the top, leaders will also set the tone for building a data-informed and data-driven culture. So do your teams a favor and budget time and energy here. And I think intention in this process can help you to identify new opportunities to increase revenue, and at the same time, hopefully deliver more value to your members because you can understand their needs better in the moment. All right, so on to modeling. We're going to talk about one model today, and then we'll hand it back to Bill to look at look at this process with an acumen. So first off, what is a model? It is simply a model is a simplified representation of reality. It's always created with assumptions and has some constraints, and therefore no model is perfect. Like we said, also no data set is perfect, but it's really designed to serve a purpose and to demonstrate or illustrate information. So a lot of us are probably familiar with simple scoring methods that address kind of those in the margins, those who are most engaged, members who are most engaged, members who are least engaged. But one of the shortcomings of just a simple scoring is that it leaves this group of everyone else kind of out. They don't get a lot of attention. So something like logistic regression or a predictive modeling can help assess the risk for all members, not just those in the margins. And to dig into that, I'm going to walk you through logistic regression. Let's do that within the context of our problem. So this is a great model, model to leverage, method to leverage when you want to predict the probability of class membership. And again, in our case, we want to predict if a member is likely to churn or to renew. This is what's called a parametric model, which means it's based upon a fixed set of parameters. No matter how much data you throw at a parametric model, it won't change its mind about how many parameters it needs. And the benefits of this type of model is that it's pretty simple to train, it's fast, and it really actually requires typically less data. But the downside is that it doesn't always do a great job about capturing complex relationships, and the results are sometimes less intuitive to the untrained eye. So once again, why did I spend all that time talking to you today about the data mining process and quick overview of modeling? I wanted to do that because this is tool agnostic. You can take all of this back to your organizations today. And now I want to hand it back to Bill to walk us through how Acumen is looking at this problem in a different light.
All right, thank you, Katie. So look, I mean, that was a lot to absorb, right? That was a lot of complicated stuff. Most of us are not used to getting that far down in the weeds on the theory, right? On the concepts behind these sort of things, and in no way to discount all of that. I am here to tell you, though, however, that you don't necessarily need to know all of that. It's great if you do, and our most engaged customers and subscribers are really into all that kind of stuff, and they love it. However, if you're like Valerie, who was in the chat a minute ago saying this is over her head, not to worry, right? Because a lot of this is built into some common tools, including Acumen, right? So on the screen now, we're talking about putting this into action, right? So we talked about the 80% of time that you'll need to spend on collection, on exploration and preparation. And then we have modeling, evaluation and iteration. And I want to add action to this, right? Because action is, if we don't take action on the things that we learn, then it's really, we're not doing ourselves any favors, right? We're not going to get the value from it. And so what I'm going to suggest here is that with a tool like Acumen, we can kind of reverse this, right? So we can, the collection, the exploration, and the preparation, and even the modeling to a great degree, those things can be automated, right? Acumen is a tool that does that for you, right? I mean, there is some setup to it, but once that's done, the collection, and the preparation of the data happens automatically. The exploration is quite intuitive and quite self-service, with filters and slicing and dicing with our tool. The model is built in, right? So we build in the most commonly used predictive models for membership retention and event attendance into the product, right? So no modeling involved, really. You just look at the results and take action. The iteration piece even is also built in, right? That model runs continuously. So you have the current results basically anytime that you log in and look. And then of course the action, you still have to take action, but even that is largely kind of determined, by what you see. And it's easy to take action, like, contacting certain cohorts, certain groups based on their likelihood to renew, or their likelihood to churn. So, and the other thing I would say is that, not to discount all the things on the left. Those are super important, and you'll never get anywhere, right, if you don't spend the right amount of time on those. But most of the value, right, comes in the things that are on the right. So that's kind of a classic thing that we're dealing with, is how can we get more people spending more time interpreting our data and taking action on the results, and less time wrangling data and getting things prepared. So all of these things, are why Acumen was created, essentially, right? So what's Acumen for, and what does it do? So on the right, you can see it's kind of like a rudimentary sort of diagram where Acumen is in the middle of the solar system, and the solar system, that's kind of the way we refer to it. You have all these planets, kind of on the outside, and there's a sun or something in the middle, and that's going to be, in this case, it's your repository for your analytical data. And so you're going to have your AMS transactional data, your maybe things from your website. You'll have your LMS, your learning data, your community, email things from your marketing, and all of those things are stored with a standard model. They're automatically prepped, in the ETL processes, right, that bring the data from all those different systems into Acumen. You can explore them kind of more or less automatically with these pre-built visualizations and dashboards, which I'm gonna show some screenshots. We've had enough technical stuff today. I'm not gonna go and show software today, but you can see software in most of our other webinars. And lastly, reuse. And reuse is an important one, because we're not collecting and aggregating this data, for just one specific purpose, right? We're doing that for our operational things, and it's not just for member churn, right? It's for our events, it's for our community, it's for our LMS, it's for just our member experience in general, right? And even if we have models built out for member retention and for event attendance, it doesn't mean we can't use that same data that's already aggregated, that's already modeled, to do things like purchases, like propensity for purchasing, or for donating, or things like that. And so we'll talk more about that down the road. So the main takeaway here is that a lot of the things that you heard Katie talk about and explain that sounded difficult, right? That's in a lot of ways they are. However, right, I mean, there are lots of Fionta's there to help you, right? If you need help with those sorts of things, and also with a tool like Acumen, a lot of those things can be automated. Okay, so let's talk about the modeling, right? So we talked about logistic regression. These are screenshots from Acumen. So there's an introduction, to the member retention model. It talks a little bit about the model itself. It talks about, what is a logistic regression model. It talks about the key terms that are used on those visualizations. There's something called candidate variables, which that's basically, instead of looking at a universe of all the possible variables, in order to productize that, we've tried to simplify it by looking at just a very specific subset of the possibilities. And they're not chosen by accident, right? They're chosen by having done these models for associations for a long time. So we have an idea going into it, what are the most likely variables that are going to affect your churn or your retention, right? So we start with those, and then they get scored, based on, some of them are positively correlated with retention, some are negative, and the model itself determines which items are included, right? And so if you've ever talked about member engagement, that's a little bit subjective, right? So you think this is important, and we kind of make this model based on all the things that you tell us are important for your engagement. When it comes to churn or when it comes to retention, we don't do it that way. The model determines what's included, and the output is the output. Okay, so let's talk about evaluation, right? So we talked about how you have these pre-built charts, pre-built filters that are allowing you to evaluate the results that you get. And the main thing here is that we might know that we have 19% churn, otherwise known as 81% retention, but that's just a number, right? In reality, there are lots of different groups or personas or cohorts or segments, depending on how you want to name them, but some of those groups have lower than average retention. Some of them have higher than average retention, and depending on how large they are, that gives us our group. But when we evaluate, we can look at certain segments, we can look at even individuals, and just determine whether the outcome was what we expected or not, right? So the way we present the data is in deciles, right? So every person, every individual, or every org, in the case of a trade association, is bucketed into one of these deciles. This tells you the likelihood that they will renew. And then we can go from there. We can look at the individual breakdown or the organizational breakdown of demographics. So we know we start to understand some things about the individuals in those orgs. Okay, so we might want to evaluate by things like member type, right? So retention rate by member type. That's something that we can compare to the results that our model predicts. We can look at by demographics, right? So in this case, we're choosing an age bucket, a gender, and a job level. Demographics might be different for your organization. And the other thing that we might want to do is by engagement score, right? So Katie mentioned this earlier. This is a really, really interesting one because we spent a lot of time talking about the correlation and the relationship between engagement score and churn, right? And engagement score and retention rate. And are they the same thing? It's like, no, they're not the same thing, right? We talked about how engagement scoring is kind of a little bit more subjective. Retention or churn is just not, right? It's all determined by the math, but you definitely do expect your highly engaged members to have a low churn or high retention, and the reverse, for those that are lesser engaged. Now, this is a topic for a whole other webinar probably, but what we call the autopilot members, the ones that renew year after year but have very low engagement in any other area, so that they're kind of break that correlation in a sense. Those are an interesting group to look at. And again, that's something we can talk about another time, but they're an example of one population that might warrant some study. Okay, I want to take a look. I noticed that David has come in with a question. I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but let's look at this. So there as you suspect, but how can you find surprises? The relationship you didn't know about, that's where the money is, right? So that of course is true, and that's a really good example of one point that I wanted to make sure that I made, and this is a good time to do it, which is that there is a trade-off, right? So I'm basically, Katie's explained to you in great detail a topic that's pretty complicated, right? And so then I come in and say, well, that seems complicated, but look how easy it is if you use Acumen, right? But the reality is there is a trade-off there, and there's room for both kinds of approaches. So what I mean by that is by productizing something and making it simple and making it so you don't need to know, a lot of the math, and you don't even need to know how to wrangle the data. That requires, to standardize some things that might the accuracy, right, or the ability to find that relationship that you didn't know about, that might be something that a custom model would find for you, right? That a standardized model might not. So there is, even if you have a tool like Acumen, and a lot of the people on the call do, or they're in the process of implementing that. Even if you have a tool like Acumen, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider, right? You shouldn't consider custom models, right? You shouldn't consider extending the models that come with your package, because very often, you look at the results of the model and they're like, well, okay, we kind of already knew that. Maybe true, maybe not true, but even if you already suspected that, with anecdotes, having that in data is, the value in that is still really high. So it's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up. So the last thing that we want to talk about, right, is as we look at the steps that Katie was describing as we go through, and the last one is iteration. Now, with a again, it's a trade-off, right? Because we used to be in the business of doing custom predictive models, and they were very accurate, right? I mean, it was a pretty long process. We included a lot of variables. We definitely found some correlations that you might not expect during that process. But it was a lot of it was kind of manual, right? And if you wanted to iterate through that model, then sometimes it would require like another engagement. It wasn't as big as the first, but it was, it definitely wasn't something that ran automatically. So with a tool like Acumen, or with some of the tools that Fionta works with, is you'll be able to iterate through that model more or less automatically, right? And make adjustments and make tweaks. So, in this thing where there's like a cycle, you've kind of seen this before in different forms, but we have to collect the data, we have to integrate, and we have to analyze. You have this central place, Acumen, right, where you keep all of that data. In this diagram, these dots here represent kind of all of those other disparate data sources, right? So you're pushing data into Acumen, and then you can evaluate your model using things like your demographics, using your engagement scores. You can use those. You can use the actual expected results, from your predictive model, and compare that against actual results to test your model and make sure that it's working. Okay, and then lastly, so we've talked about how we prepare and collect and all of that. So how do we take action, right? Lots of ways you can do that, but here's one really quick example. So here is our likelihood of member retention. Again, this is like kind of the opposite of churn. So Fionta calls it churn and looks at the ones who leave. We call it retention and look at the ones who stay. The formula is the same. It's just kind of the reverse. And so but we still have this idea. So whether we look at our bars going up or whether we look at our bars going down, the idea is that most often, right, it's the ones in the middle is where we can make a difference, right? That's where we want to take action. So if you've seen our sales pitches, you've heard this before, right? But the idea is if we know, that Katie is 5% likelihood to renew, we're not going to send her the big brochure, the glossy, renewal pack. And likewise, if I'm up here at 85 or 95%, maybe just send me the email, the one that nobody ever clicks on, and they just go ahead and renew their membership without a lot of fanfare about that. So, but the idea is that these deciles, 4 through 8, those are individuals that we know a lot about. We know their demographics. We know the predictors, right? We know the things that cause them to be in these buckets, and we can take action based on that, right? So if we looked at just maybe one of these, right, instead of we just look at those in decile number 6, we know that they're 55% likely on average to renew. But we want to find out about them, right? So we can do the drill through, which is built into the product, and then we're going to look at the individual breakdown, right? And that means that we're going to look at the demographics, right? And so when I look at demographics, I might have a bunch of different things, but just for the sake of demonstration, one of the things I noticed right away is, hey, look, we have a lot of C-level executives, right, in this population, right? And so I could actually stack several demographic characteristics together, maybe even some behaviors as well. But just again, for the sake of demonstration, what we might do then is drill through to the individual details, right? So I'm going from, from a population of individuals, based on their likelihood to renew. Then I'm looking at a demographic breakdown for characteristics that I care about, because I'm looking for a call to action, right? And then eventually I'm going to drill through, to now I have a call to action that's for, C-level executives that are kind of on the fence whether they're going to renew or not. I can act on this ahead of my usual renewal campaign. And if I'm able to specialize and target my message effectively, this is going to have really big results with relatively small effort. Okay, and so then I'll drill through and I'll get a list which will have real names and addresses on this, and I can take action. This is like a marketing list that I've developed, and it took me a couple of clicks to do that. Okay, so looking beyond member churn, right? So I mentioned Acumen Insights. That's the built-in models that come with our product. That's member retention, and that is meeting attendance, right? There are other ways to leverage that integrated data. So I mentioned likelihood to donate, likelihood to purchase. Those are things that likelihood to do really just about anything, right? Is going to, in the association context, is going to be using that same data. A company like Fionta can help you build those out. If you do that, and if you have Acumen, if you have a tool like that, you can develop new custom models in a custom workspace, which we'll provide to you. And then you can build those yourself. If you have people on your staff that can do it, you certainly could hire Fionta to help you do that inside the custom workspace. And then there are a lot of other tools as well, right? So, obviously we talk mostly about Acumen, but Fionta is a Salesforce partner as well. They're experts in that. So if you have Salesforce, or if you have one of the Salesforce-based AMS tools, there is a prediction builder that you can use. You might need some help to configure that and to build those things out. But you've already done a lot of that work, right? All of that collection and some of the preparation through other things that you're doing. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Tableau CRM is also a product in the Salesforce ecosystem that is becoming more popular and can help out in this area as well. So the idea really is you definitely can use Acumen or a tool like that. If you're lucky, it's going to have some of these things already built in, so you don't have to do it from scratch. But there's certainly a big opportunity to bring in a partner to help you do more with it. Anything you'd want to add to that, Katie?
No, I think you covered it. I do think it's important to underscore the value of Acumen, combining all these disparate data sources, both structured and unstructured, AMS, website, social media, community. So we can take that and, like you said, we can leverage other tools to ask different questions. So it's a really, really good place to start.
All right. So yeah, so there's some resources, right? I mean, there's Katie she was teaching us stuff for a long time here. So you don't have to necessarily remember all of that, but there's anything on the screen that's like, I don't know, that you in particular, like, you have a favorite on here that you want to call out? Like, if I only read one of these, which one do you suggest?
Well, I'm really interested in, the ethics around all of these topics, and the book Weapons of Math Destruction. Kathy O'Neill is, I think, almost a must read for a lot of us in this space. She does a really great job articulating, again, some more real world examples where, if we're not careful, it can be problematic. We can perpetuate a lot of the bias that exists in our society today. And kind of tangential to that, Algorithmic Justice League was started by a woman, Joy Buolamwini, and a great Netflix documentary, if you are intrigued, is called Coded Bias. Well, you can learn all about it. So I would start there.
Cool. Yeah, that's a That's another topic, right? I mean, I say this a lot,
Yeah.
like that's a topic for another webinar, but this one really is. And I'm gonna, so we do, you'll see some surveys from us from time to time, which ask you like the topics that you're interested in. That's one that I'm curious about. And maybe that's one we can invite Katie back on to talk about at another point in the year, because I think it's becoming more and more relevant, right? As we start using predictive, we start using AI in some of our tools, and yeah, it's one of those topics, right? We have to be careful not to go too deep into it because people glaze over, myself included. But yeah, that's something we definitely can do. Yeah, so there's a couple A2 resources on here. You know, some blogs about lifetime value and predictive analytics. We've done a webinar or two on retention and how to improve that, and predictive is kind of a part of that as well. Okay, any last minute questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat or in the Q&A. And as we do that, I want to mention that you know, we have this other webinar series where we do how-to things. That's myself and Greg Pollack, and we'll teach you how to do things. It's usually with you know, with software in a lot of cases, but the one that's up next is how to create quick wins with analytics. So a lot of people on this call are already doing things with analytics. This is more about how do we get that initial momentum? How do we get it adopted? How do we get the board to approve it? And that's kind of, you know, quite relevant for, you know, this time of year for a lot of associations. So that's on the February 9th at 3 p.m. Hope you can join us. And I don't see anything else in the Q&A or the chat. So I'll put you on the spot, Katie, and give you the last word. And otherwise, we'll hope to see you again next time. Anything you want to close us out?
Happy to be here. Yeah, looking forward to next time.
All right, very good. Thanks all, and thank you, Katie. It was fun, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.